Now, you may have heard how important body language is to building rapport and friendships. In fact, as early as the 1970s, they discovered that body language was the dominating factor for the likability of a person. What they found was 7% was actually verbal, what you said. 38% was the tonality in terms of how you say things. The difference between darling and darling, you know that's important. But the dominating factor was 55% was body language, was what they called physiology, but it includes your dress. And that's why people can make judgment on you within the first couple of minutes of meeting you. And then they spend the rest of the time trying to justify that decision. So, knowing that your dress and how you present yourself and how you focus on body language is critical to productive relationships. But when you are making a call on body language, just recognize that it's not just if they're rubbing their nose or rubbing their ear or if it's got a particular meaning. In fact, if you want to know about those meanings, look at our free ebook on our website. But what it is important to understand is that it's 3 indicators that we call a cluster that you'd need before making any judgment, because a person might just have an itchy nose. Let me give you an example of this. So if I cross my arms, you might say I'm negative or held back or defensive, but in reality, I just could be cold, or it could be that I'm just comfortable. But if I cross my arms and then I move my body language and then I gave you the look, you would actually say 3 indicators. That makes a cluster. So if a person is set up as a cluster, then you're more chance of making a meaning from the body language you're viewing. Don't make a judgment on a single thing because it may have no significance. Now, when we're talking about rapport, have you ever noticed you might be leaning against a vending machine in a very odd way and the person you're talking to is actually copying your body language? This is a sign of natural rapport. But you can also influence it by what we call matching or mirroring. When 2 people look alike, that's an indication that they're in rapport. Now, the concept of matching and mirroring is a mirror is when the person is a mirror image of yourself. So, for example, if I had a right elbow up, if they had their left elbow up and looking together, we would look like a mirror image of one another. That would be called mirroring. In terms of matching, that's when I would have the right elbow up and they would have their right elbow up. So they're matching exactly in terms of the different sides of the body. So matching and mirroring is a natural reflection of a person being in rapport or people being in rapport with one another. You can have a lot of fun with this actually because you can determine whose relationships are going good and other, because when you look at it, the matching and rapport and mirroring is a natural concept of our human nature. Now, you can fully or partially match. That means, for example, if a person has a crossed arms, you may choose not to have crossed arms, but you might have crossed at the wrist, the crossed wrist area. That would be a partial match. For example, you might have crossed legs and you might not be able to get your legs crossed, so you might have crossed ankles. Again, that's partial and it has largely the same effect. Just remember, don't keep matching someone if they move. If they cross their arms, don't cross your arms or put your arms down. Don't do all the things that they're doing, otherwise it'll be obvious. In fact, I noticed that we really only need to use this when things are going wrong or you're building instant rapport up front. Which means that if you allowed someone to sit down before you sat down, that means you, in your peripheral vision, you'd be able to see how they're sitting and then take a stance which would be similar to theirs. In that way, it's not so obvious. Now, it also is very important as a leader when you're dealing with troubled people that are actually having some form of conflict. Now, imagine you're sitting down with 2 people and you're in the middle. Now, remember, matching and mirroring signifies I've got rapport. But if one party, if they were both upset with one another, they wouldn't be matching or mirroring naturally. What they will be doing is quite opposite in their behaviour style. One might be there with crossed arms and crossed legs, and the other person may be open body language. Now, this becomes a bit of a challenge because if both of us then cross our arms, meaning that I match and mirror only one party, and I look at the other, they may interpret it that I'm on their side and we're both against them. So when dealing with different people, the trick is to try and get a neutral body language, which isn't really possible. But imagine if I've got one person with the crossed arms and crossed legs and the other one in open posture. And in this particular case, I can actually sit and cross my arms and legs when I'm talking to them, and only when I'm talking to them, and then drop my body language when I turn and speak to the other person. And in that particular case, neither party feels like I'm against one another. Because if I turned even with the open gestures to the person with their crossed arms, they would then feel that I was aligned with the person that I was copying body language with. So how do we do this? Well, this is a concept of leading. For example, if a person's very upset, they might be standing there crossed arms and they've got the three gestures, the body language and the eye look. Now, interestingly, if you went up to them in any other manner, for example, if I went out with my arms out or my hands down, if I went to any other manner, I wouldn't be able to build rapport as fast as if I copied them with the crossed arms. Now, I certainly don't want to copy the other elements, which shows that I may be angry or frustrated. But I would go up friendly, but I'd still cross my arms because it's the most natural rapport building posture I can take if the other person's all upset. Now, once I've got that rapport with them, I can test that rapport. We call this leading. And leading means I change my body language, and if I did have rapport, likely they will follow. For example, if I went from crossed arms and then I dropped my arms, they may then drop their arms. But notice that I didn't go too dramatically. I didn't go from the crossed arms to arms behind the back because that's too dramatic. I might go from crossed arms to a partial cross and then drop my hands. And in that particular case, I can test if the other person is following. That's that concept of leading. Now go back to that scenario where I'm sitting between two people who initially were having challenges with one another. Whilst their body language is totally opposite one another, that conversation may not go anywhere. In fact, if I'm only matching and mirroring one party, then that's when the other party goes home all upset because they felt like I was on the other person's side. It's like going to marriage counselling. One person goes home and says, weren't they a fantastic counsellor? And the other person says, what do you mean? They were always on your side. So we can't afford to take sides because it's not going to be building up the rapport and the communications to be able to start looking at the issues at hand. So imagine I've got one person crossed arms and crossed legs. So when I am speaking to them, I'm crossing my arms and catching and matching and mirroring what they're doing. And then I drop my hands to go to the person who has got more open body language when I'm discussing it with them. When I then go back after this toing and froing, I'm building rapport and relationship with both parties. So when I finally get to the person with the crossed arms, I'm agreeing with them, etc. But then I'll change my body language and I'll lead them out of their crossed arms and crossed legs to hopefully a more open style. When I've then got them both as open style, that means we're at a point where I can come to the center and start the communication with the whole group. Isn't it amazing just to think that your interventions have so much influence on the ability for those individuals to engage and to overcome conflict? Because if we can't get to the platform of being able to communicate, therefore the whole issue may not be resolved. The other thing to note is if you ever noticed that when you see a male and female often and they're standing too close together, what actually happens, the woman steps back, the man steps forward, the woman steps back, man steps forward, and we start doing this dance around the floor. Well, when you look at that, that's because the male and female are both matching and mirroring. So the gentleman may not actually get the picture. In fact, what happens, sometimes it's just because they can't hear what's happening, so they're getting closer. And they're going into what's known as an intimate zone. And when you're not wanted in that intimate zone, the person will naturally step back because they've got an uncomfort level. Now, when you look at it, if they step back and it's a round sound, all they have to do is increase their voice volume. So they might say, do you come here very often? And if the volume is too loud, the other person will naturally step back. But because you've got this dance scenario, it's because the matching and the mirroring is naturally there and the person at a subconscious level isn't actually picking it up. So to break that rapport, to let them know that it's inappropriate to come into the intimate zone would be when I changed my behaviour. I wasn't matching and mirroring, I was actually doing something different. Imagine the man was stepping forward and I was the female. If I changed my body language and moved my body, that would tell them, hey, you're not allowed to be here, and they'll naturally step back. Instead of me matching and mirroring and just physically stepping back because they'll keep moving with me. So how does this work? Well, firstly, I should mention that these zones, there's 4 zones, and they vary depending on the country or the culture you're working in. In fact, they've even found that when you're working in a metropolitan area compared to living in a rural area, the rural area they'll step wider, they'll be further away. So I'm going to talk about what was found in the Western society in countries like America, Australia, England, etc. for city dwellers. And the first zone is called intimate. And they found that that generally is 15 to 46 centimetres. So it's where a person can easily step forward and kiss you. It's in that intimate zone. And that clearly is there for those people that we are intimately having a relationship or wanting to have a relationship with. Now the personal zone is at 46 centimetres to typically 1.2 metres. Again, Western world and in a city dwelling. And that's typically where they're standing fairly close to you, but it's more of a friend than a close friend. And then you've got the social zone, and that's typically when we're standing with a couple of people, and that's around that 1.2 to 3.6 metres. And of course, the public zone is when it's over that 3.6 metres, such as in a training or an education space. Now, you must be cognizant of the fact, are you standing too close to people? And their body language will tell you, because if they step back, that means you're in an intimate zone. Step back, go into the personal zone. So we must be very respectful of people's zones, and knowing that when we're trying to get into a group, say for example at a networking event, and I'm standing outside the team and I want to get into that group, you might notice that if I'm not matching and mirroring, it's going to be harder for me to get in there. But if they were all holding a drink and had their hand in their pocket, then it's very easy for me to step back and mimic that behaviour style. So in that case, I could stand there with a hand in my drink, with my hand in my pocket, and strangely enough, I'm matching and mirroring that will set up the most comfort level for them then to realise I was there once I got close enough for them to open up and let me join the group. But too often you're actually in a completely different body language, and therefore you're sending out the wrong messages. Because remember, 55% is the likability of you based on your body language and dress. So some of the other key points was body language can be used to build rapport and deal with difficult people. Remember, if you're coming across a difficult person, it's about matching and mirroring, but not giving away all the signals that you're equally upset, angry, or frustrated. Because if they were upset, they're going to be showing it in all ways. Noting that extroverts show body language more so than introverts. And the reason why this occurs is an introvert is an internal processing person. It means that when they say something, or you say something to them, they're thinking about it in their mind before they verbalise it. And that's why you'll see a scenario, you run up and say, what do you think of my idea? And they're standing thinking about it and go, what, don't you like my idea? They say, no, it's not that I don't like your idea, I'm just thinking it through. So that's why we say often the introverted style is far more serious because they give very little away. Whereas the style that's the most extroverted gives everything away. You know when they're happy, you know when they're sad, you know pretty much everything about them. Oh, they're upset today. And you'll be able to pick that up because their body language expresses it so well. Remember, there needs to be 3 indicators, that cluster, before you make any judgment where the body language is good, bad, or indifferent. But if you're a trainer or a speaker, you cannot judge the body language of individuals in a group. You have to look at the group dynamics overall. Because I had one scenario where the person was turned, they had their head down, they almost looked like they were ignoring me, they had these crossed arms and everything like that. And after the event, they came to me and said that was the most life-riveting, changing speech I've ever heard. And what it was is they were actually an auditory person, and they were turning so they could use their auditory, their best sense, to really engage with what I was saying. But up on stage, it was quite a sense that they weren't listening, and they were totally switched off, and they were not interested. So I learned, being a professional speaker and trainer, that you can't make judgments on a group body language from individuals. But you can make a generalisation of where the group is at based on how much they're moving and all those other things when the whole group or the majority of the group are doing that. Remember, to build rapport, we have that matching and mirroring. But equally, I can test my rapport by changing my body language and seeing if they follow, called leading. And the last thing to remember is body language is influenced by both cultural and geographic location. Those zones, again, will vary depending on what country I'm in and whether I'm in a metropolitan or a regional area. Have a lot of fun with this because it's all about engaging better with people. And if we can utilize body language to build that rapport, to have an improved relationship and better communications, then we're using it to our advantage.